the city, and they'll tell you that St. Mary and Martha Lutheran Church welcomes everybody. And like I said,
Yeah, but
we
remember, sorry, Meg, but we don't have much time. Remember, we're focusing right now on, that's a great thing that you said, and that's a good thing that you're doing for Frankie and Ann. But remember, we're focusing right now on, the focus is on unhoused individuals, right? The bias for that are most vulnerable,
Yeah.
who are marginally housed or homeless. This is our focus today.
right.
And just so you know, I'm starting the Facebook live stream. We're starting to have some participants who are dropping in. So you can keep talking. Just I wanted to give you the heads up that it's an observed talking.
Oh, okay.
Do you want us to put our mics off when we're not talking, or?
Yes, if you feel comfortable turning your mics on and off when you're talking and not talking, feel free to do that. If you're not good at it, I can also help.
Okay. Do you want me to continue, or I don't know what I'm doing?
Feel free. I will interrupt you at 2:00 because I'll do an introduction to the people who are gathering. So at 2:00 we'll formally start with the people who are online. But feel free to, you can chat about whatever you want while people are gathering.
Okay, here we go. One thing is that the homeless people, like I said, I am case manager as well as the director over at Open Heart. And one thing that the homeless people really miss is being able to go, some of them went to Open Cathedral on 16th Street or to Civic Center, and they don't have that ability. And that's another reason why I was talking about what I was talking about. So at least they could come, and be at church and feel like somebody loves them and cares. Because right now that's what they're scared of, that nobody cares because they live in a tent, they're on the street, and nobody shows them kind compassion. And that's something that, that's one of the big things that starts with anything.
Out at night, I can't tell you how many people say to me, "Oh, you're the only one who comes and picks up." Especially when we were really in a stronger shelter in place. It's like it was the unhoused folks and the police officers and us and night ministry. Like that was it. What does to be out in.
Valerie, I don't know if you're getting cut off a little bit, off and on. Or do you have your mic up all the way?
I think I do. Let me make sure. Thank you for. This is my. Oh no, I'm not. I thought I had it.
Well, we are at 2:00. So while you're working on your microphone, Valerie, I'm going to introduce the folk who have gathered to begin listening to this conversation. For those who are watching here on the Zoom webinar, you may have noticed that you do not have the feature to turn on a video or to have your microphone. That's because we are operating in Zoom webinar mode where just the panelists have video and voice. And this is particularly important for today's conversation when we're talking about folk who are homeless and marginally housed and the pastors who care for them, because technology is a really big hurdle for some of us to be able to be a part of this conversation, and limiting the number of videos that are streaming makes it a little bit easier for some of our participants to be participants today. If you are in the Zoom webinar, might notice that at the bottom of your screen, there is both a chat section and a Q&A section. You are invited to use the chat section to share any of your wisdom, resources that you know about, anything. If you'd like to introduce yourself to other folk who are here in the Zoom, you are welcome to do that. The Q&A section is where you can post questions that you'd like to pose for panelists or have panelists speak to. And I'll be reviewing that and also the comments that are on our Facebook Live, and pulling questions out of those for people who would like to be able to ask questions. Typically, we do our question and answer time between 3 and 3:30, but if for some reason a question pops up and it's exactly what we're talking about right then, I might pull a question in that moment. The other thing to know about if you are on Zoom is that following this talk, you will, if you have registered, you will receive a link to the archived video. You're welcome to share that video with members of your congregation or others who you think might want to listen to this video. And then there's also a survey link. Unfortunately, the survey only allows you to fill out the survey one time, not every single time that we have our town halls. So just know that your feedback is valuable, and sorry that it can't happen all the time. But here we are, and I am really grateful for all who are gathered to be panelists with us at our town hall today, and all of you who are listening. Being a part of a town hall is a leap of faith. In part, it's a leap of faith that our technology will work throughout this entire town hall, and it's also a leap of faith to be sharing your ideas and your thoughts in a recorded time and space. Those of us who are gathering to speak today are speaking on our own behalf and don't necessarily hold all the answers for all people who are homeless and marginally housed. It's just a time of listening to what is coming to us during this time. I'll start by introducing myself because we're talking about a conversation that I happen to have some experience in. I'm Pastor Megan Rohrer. I'm the pastor at Grace Lutheran here in San Francisco. And prior to my call at Grace Lutheran, I spent 12 years working full-time with the homeless and hungry along Polk Street and at different congregations around San Francisco. I've been an assistant night minister. I have been a faithful fool and slept on the streets for a week at a time over a 10-year span of doing that. And I have also, in my own life, been homeless twice. When we were small children and my parents broke up and there was a domestic violence situation, we lived with our aunt for a period of time and got our food from WIC. And there was a period of time later in my life when I lived with someone who was not interested in an eviction process when they were asking me to leave, and basically gave me a day to leave the housing where I was in and handed me the food pantry list. So it might be a good time to say that when we're talking about homelessness, we're not necessarily only talking about people who are sleeping on a sidewalk. The federal definition for homeless is anyone who is dwelling somewhere where they don't have their own kitchen and their own bathroom unit. So that includes everything up to very small housing, like single room occupancy hotel rooms, if you hear the word SRO, where people live marginally housed. And so we're going to use the term marginally housed probably a lot. And that might be someone who lives inside part of the month and outside other parts of the month. Marginally housed is just a way of saying that they still have a lot of the vulnerabilities of their economic situation. And I'm sure some of our speakers today will define some of the other terms and phrases that we're using. I'm going to invite Pastor Valerie, would you be willing to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Reverend Valerie McEntee. I'm the night minister at San Francisco Night Ministry. I've been there a little over 12 years. Just coming up on 12 years on the street, almost exactly. Like tomorrow, it's my 12-year anniversary of starting on. And before that, I was on the phones. I have been homeless for a little over a year, doubling up, not sleeping outside, but in my early adulthood with the baby and everything, and was on WIC and Medicaid and all of that. So I have some experience sitting that side of the desk, so to speak. I forget what else I'm supposed to say about myself. And
will you tell people what the night ministry is?
Sure. San Francisco Night Ministry has been around since 1964, serving the people of the night, which includes people like bouncers and bartenders and party goers, but largely most of the folks we serve are people who live outside or are marginally housed. And we work from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m., walking around the parts of the city that are busy at that time of night, being with people where they are, meeting them where they are, to provide presence, pastoral care, once in a while a little crisis intervention, but that's not the bulk of what we do. And when we get into how things have changed in the current situation, then I'll speak more about how our practice has changed. It's involves a lot more hand sanitizer than it did a year ago.
Thank you. Pastor Monique, will you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Reverend Monique Ortiz. I'm pastor of Santa Maria y Santa Marta Lutheran Church. We're in the Mission, Spanish and English congregation, also a sanctuary church. And we also house Dolores Street Community Services, which runs the Dolores Shelter, and that has been for over a decade. I'm also director of community programs for the San Francisco Night Ministry, and along with Reverend Valerie, we've been colleagues for almost 12 years. I used to be associate night minister, and what I'm more in charge of is our community programs now and our open cathedrals, which are outside street churches. And I'll talk more about that also. And I'm also among one of the clergy leaders for Faith in Action. And lately we have been really fighting and struggling to get our unhoused siblings into housing and hotels, especially during COVID, and also seniors. So I am just thrilled to be here with you, and thank you for asking me to take part in this, Reverend Megan. Thank you.
Absolutely. And last but certainly not least, the most important Megan in the Zoom call. Megan, would you be willing to introduce yourself?
Yes, Pastor Rohrer. My name's Megan Sue Belefonte. I am a member of the St. Mary and Martha League. We're a nonprofit agency that helps seniors, low-income families, and the homeless. And not only do I deal with that as a case manager and director, but I spent almost 2 years homeless. The last year, and it was almost a year and 3 months. I had a lot of things happen, so I know firsthand of the challenges, and I'll be talking about some of those later on. But like I said, thank you, Reverend, for inviting me, and it's going to be a real honor to be here.
Well, thank you, all of you. I was hoping, kind of as we kicked this off a little bit, maybe we could speak a little bit about how the coronavirus is affecting folk. Sheltering in place is a thing that usually assumes you have shelter in how they define sheltering in place. And we know that this has been particularly difficult on the homeless and marginally housed. How have you noticed that things have changed over the past few months? Megan, would you be willing to go first? I think you're on mute.
There we go.
You did it.
I personally, when COVID first hit, I was homeless and I was among the people at risk. I am 65 years old, and it was scary because, you don't know what's going to happen. And, in a way, it was lucky that the police department had 4 officers that went and cut my tent up, because that gave the police department a chance to get me into a hotel, which subsequently led me to the housing that I'm in. But the most part is that everybody I talk to, even clients I'm talking to now, they're scared. Everybody's scared because, number one, they have no way of protecting themselves from the virus. And so therefore, every single day, every single minute is, am I going to get this virus? Is it going to be to the point where it's going to be deadly? And everybody's scared. And, like I said, I go out, I do street outreach 2 days a week, and I would like to have a penny for every ounce of hand sanitizer and gloves and masks that we hand out, because, they just come to us and they flock. And I feel bad for these people, and I want to do more, but my income is limited, grants are limited. So I'm just like stuck hearing them and giving them like the sanitizer and the mask and trying to get with the city hall to get these people that are really vulnerable, get them into housing. I'm lucky sometimes I'm not. But like I said, it's a big thing. The big thing is right now fear, and they feel a lack of communication with people. They still have people going around taking videos of them and making them feel bad that way. And they just, some people are from night ministry that went to your open cathedrals, Pastor Monique and Pastor Valerie, and they miss that. That's one of the big things is we miss that. And, like I said, I can understand. I was there. I know what it's like.
Yeah, the street economy is such a sharing economy that when sharing becomes unsafe, it just really makes things hard to care for each other. And Megan Sue, you're just such a great example of what I experience with a lot of the homeless community, in that they're very giving folk. So I'm really grateful that you're able to chat a little bit about that. Pastor Monique, do you have any insights into how things are a little bit different now that the coronavirus is affecting folk?
Oh gosh, I think in every way, really. Like at Mary Martha, the shelter, Dolores Street, went from just being part-time from 7 at night to 7 in the morning to, under city orders, of course, right, to 24 hours. We also have other tenants that rent space in the building, and of course they had to shelter in place. But then just seeing it streamline was a good thing, actually, because some of the more at-risk folks were taken to hotels. I've seen experiences with my sole sibling, actually. I have many siblings. Everyone's my sibling, but my soul blood brother is homeless. And the last I knew, he was staying at MSC South. MSC South was pretty much one of the first shelters to come up with a huge amount of COVID cases, over 100. So during that time, agencies and other ministries were fighting, including the Coalition on Homelessness and Faith in Action and so many more, to try to get our folks into housing, everyone who was on the streets. This was March and April, and of course the city, was doing what they were doing, and so the residents at MSC South had to be taken into hotels. So, that all changed, and then other shelters followed suit, and they began to streamline, making room for less people in the shelter and social distancing and everything. But a situation like that, in my case, in my personal case, I've lost track of my brother. I have no idea where he's at, and no phone or anything, no communication. That's a huge worry, not solely for my mother, my family, and I, or it's for many, many families. That's another issue, through COVID. I have congregants from my church who are unhoused. And again, I have lost track of some of them. Often in the streets, they have a phone, and the phone gets stolen or lost, immediately or soon after. And so then you can't keep track of where they are or how you can help them. I have walked the streets during the day, just talking to folks in the Tenderloin, and everywhere. And elderly folks who have been waiting for housing forever. And there really are truly what Megan said about the fear is real, but more than the fear, it's like, the feeling of they're not looked upon as human beings, as valued. It's like they don't matter. Their lives do not matter. Their being is not being valued, as long as the city just sits and doesn't really do what they're supposed to do, it hurts. It just hurts to see not solely our elderly who are ill, who have been on the streets 10 years awaiting housing, who, for whatever and million reasons, some of them are Black African American brothers and sisters. I see a lot of Latinos in the mission, and now more and more because of COVID. And we're going to see the repercussions of this in the next few months. We're going to have a lot more people unhoused, families, and from all walks of life, all cultures, all ethnicities, and it's a true worry. It's really changed as far as affecting night ministry, our open cathedrals, which were our long term. I mean, it was like Open Cathedral Civic Center, the longest of the two, the oldest of the two. We're going on 11 years. We completed our 11th year, and right there in Civic Center, United Nations Plaza, and it's a community. It's not just, come for worship service and communion. It's from all walks of life. People would gather, whether they believe in God or whatever their beliefs are, sexual orientation, no belief at all. It didn't matter. It's a gathering of community and family. And that's been, of course, torn away because of COVID. We cannot meet. A lot of our folks were unhoused. Some of them were definitely homeless, as you made the definition. They lived in SROs, single room occupancy hotels, many of them, in such a marginalized and limited income that a lot of people think also, if they see someone out in the streets panhandling, asking for $1, they, automatically they think, go get a job. But they're not walking in their shoes. They don't know their history. Every single human being, every single brother and sister in the streets or in marginalized housing has a beautiful story. And if they haven't walked in their shoes, they shouldn't, because many of them can't live off with $100 a month. That's why they're panhandling. That's why they go to the lines where they serve food, etc. So there's just so much bias and so much misunderstanding and ignorance about our unhoused sisters and brothers. So it's affected. COVID, the pandemic has affected, I think, every area. It's not just a homeless problem. It's a human problem. It's a health problem. It's our problem. It's not just their problem. Thank you.
Yeah. Pastor Valerie, do you have any thoughts you want to add to that?
Sure. I mean, everything Megan and Monique said. It's the fear for sure. I think that's lessened a little bit as people have realized that fortunately the virus is not spreading quite as rapidly or as badly as we had feared among people who live outside. Unfortunately, we've also seen overdose deaths go way up as people lose their support. NA's not meeting, AA's not meeting. I presume they probably have like online Zoom meetings, I'm assuming, but that's not accessible for our folks. The outdoor worship services such as Open Cathedral. Not a week goes by that somebody doesn't ask me, when is it starting again? When will you guys be back, both in the mission and for the Civic Center worship? I had just a couple of weeks ago, I ran across one of our brothers who usually comes to worship, and he said, I go down there every week hoping you'll be there. Like, just broke my heart. And I'm like, we want so badly to be there, and we miss you, and we just can't right now. So there's, and plus the movie nights, the game nights, sitting with your buddies in the dining room at Glide or St. Anthony's, all of that has been stripped away. And so people have really lost so much of their community support. All the things the faithful fools do. There's always something happening there where people can go and be in community, and it's not safe. And so there's that loss of community, definitely the sense of abandonment. The first few weeks, everybody was asking me, when are the hotel rooms coming in? When are the hotel, everybody kind of thought they were going to get a hotel room because that was sort of the rhetoric we were hearing out of the city. And I had to say, I don't know. There are people working on it. Faith in Action's working on it, Coalition's working on it, and then after a few weeks, people started to realize there's not a room in the inn for me. There's no room in the inn for me. And, then it started to be like, well, we always knew they didn't care, but now we can really tell they don't care, and there's more sanitation stations now, but originally the city only put up 8 hand sanitation stations for the city. They've increased it since then, but it was so inadequate at first. And just, people know when they've been left to die, and that lands so hard. If you can just imagine if somebody, as Reverend Monique was saying, disregards you so much that it's like, yeah, it's okay, we can leave you out there to die. We're not gonna, you imagine in this kind of a crisis, I guess we all kind of have this movie version of like the heroes rushing in and doing everything they can to save people. And it just didn't happen. It just didn't happen in San Francisco. It was just like, I think the city has done well by its housed population. I was really glad that we started shelter in place a little sooner than some other places and so forth. I think if you're stably housed in San Francisco, the city actually did pretty well by you. But if you're unhoused or unstably housed, the city just literally left people to die. And it's, whether by COVID or by overdose because you don't have the support or, just, there's really that deep, deep sense of abandonment. And I feel like that's kind of the deepest wound to our community. There's layers and layers of wounds, but that sense of abandonment, so many people saying to me, you're the only one who comes and checks on me. Like literally the only one. And, unfortunately, we have a teeny tiny budget, so we have one night minister on a night. So it's not like we're in every single neighborhood every night. Like maybe every neighborhood gets a night minister once a week. And like, if that's the only person checking on you and handing you a bottle of sanitizer, I never thought my ministry would become about hand sanitizer, but we've handed out over 1,000 bottles of hand sanitizer. Since this, and some tents and a few other things, and lots of masks. We got some very generous mask donations. And it lands as care. I mean, people want to be safe. Like even as they're saying thank you, they're putting hand sanitizer on their hands before they're even done saying thank you. People want to be safe, but people they want to know that somebody cares whether they live or die. And it's just when nobody is coming, by to care, or once a week, the night minister is there for, a minute to hand you a bottle of hand sanitizer, maybe 20 minutes to talk things through. Everybody wants to feel like somebody cares whether they live or die. And that's the perception has been that people really don't. And it's getting food has been hard, a lot worse hunger, a lot people who supplemented their income with panhandling or selling street sheets. Well, if there's nobody on the street, that's not going to work. So your tiny, tiny income just got squeezed even more. And then people saying, I've been told to shelter in place. How do I shelter in place? I don't even have a blanket. How do I shelter in place? That's the other question I would get over and over and over again.
Yeah, there's also a number of the places that the homeless used to go for some of their basic, like, daily routines. Like when you close every library, that means you've cut off the bathroom / shower of many people. You've cut off their only email access for a lot of people, and sometimes their only way to have a self-care tool, right? Being able to read a book and disappear kind of from what's going on in the world around you, or have air conditioning, or whatever it was that was the sanctuary of that place. And so it's, I think, really hitting me that what's always been true about the night ministry is that you all provide pastoral care for folk who sometimes are in a place where they, either by their own self-perception or by society self-perception, feel like it's hard for them to navigate everything that is kind of expected in church-going life, right? The night ministry kind of always was the minister for folk who maybe some did go to church on Sundays, but felt like there were barriers to that relationship. And I think given the technology difficulties, and I'm even grateful today that Megan Sue, you could go inside a worship space that would allow you to have internet access, because it's been hard to have conversations like these when technology is such a barrier. And so to be able to talk about the ways that it's even harder, right? Because people who don't have internet access, they still got God, right? And they've still got their own faith, but they don't have the faithful people who were community for them, except for those who are still able to kind of venture out into the streets. And I think I told you guys before our webinar started, I look a lot younger than I am. I'm 40, but I look 16 sometimes. And so not too long ago, when I was asked to preach in another congregation, a congregation where I was there called pastor, not Saints Mary and Martha, you're fine, it wasn't you. I was there, one of their called pastor, called to do work with the homeless, and they had invited me to preach that day, and didn't look at me more than once, because they just presumed I was too young to be someone interested in worshiping in their congregation, and they called the police to ask the homeless person in front of the church to leave. And I was wearing a clergy collar that day. It's actually happened to me at 2 different congregations. One was Lutheran, one was UCC, both in San Francisco. And they knew I was coming that day. So maybe it's just something about me, but my hunch is that sometimes as congregations, we get into a groove in who we think wants to worship with us. We say all are welcome and we mean it, and we hope our churches will grow, but sometimes there are folk who make us nervous for any particular reason. My current congregation, Grace Lutheran, 2 members of the congregation once came to get me while I was putting on my robe, and to let me know that a homeless person had come to church and I should ask them to leave. When I looked into the sanctuary, it turned out it was my PhD advisor, a very fancy professor. He just had a long beard. And for them, a long beard didn't mean Southern gentleman and academic. It meant a particular population. And so it's in the Lutheran Constitution, in the job description of a pastor, to say that we are to preach and teach in support of the poor. Right? So it's one of our required job descriptions, but not always something that's easy to live out. I'm wondering if you can share with us stories where you've noticed bias in churches, or places where people have not yet lived up to that call to be an ever-flowing stream of justice. Monique, would you be willing to go first?
Yes, yes, it's real. It exists. I've experienced it many times. There was a church on the coast. I won't mention the town, beautiful little town, but they were used to, that was my first call, and they were used to just having this pretty much white congregation, and I kept seeing this man on Highway 1 with a walking stick every time I drove on the coast to the church. And one time I stopped and I invited him to the church. We became friends. He showed up and he became a member. And then after a few months, he stopped coming one Sunday, and I thought, what happened? And I got wind that some members of the congregation, some of the elders, had approached him during the week midtown, when he was in town, I mean, and had told him not to come back if he didn't shower and dress better. So that absolutely broke my heart, literally. And he lived in a cave by the ocean. I went to look for him, and it was true. So when it was my turn to preach one Sunday, I preached a sermon that some of the folks, some of the members stopped coming to the church after that. And I wasn't afraid to speak up. And it kills me because it happens all the time. Even, I mean, I've witnessed it to a minor degree, even in my own congregation, even though we're open and affirming and we're a sanctuary congregation. And there's always going to be some folks who are. I got a comment recently from one of members saying that it seems like I'm running a shelter and not a church. And that was just shocking. And this is just very recent. And it's sad. So it's happening, even when I don't want it to happen, even when most of us are open and inclusive and affirming to all people. But I just really think it doesn't exist in across denominations when you say all are welcome. We welcome everybody. There's always going to be some folks. I was put in a position in another church where I might have been the pastor there, final candidate to be the pastor, and one of the call committee members asked me, what would I do if a homeless individual walked in, and would I let him in? Would I let him sit? Would I send him to the back? I said, no, of course I would let him in. Of course, like anyone else. And so anyway, they didn't like my answer. He didn't like my answer. It happens. It's happening now across the board. I think with everything, if you're a woman pastor, it happens. If, our unhoused siblings, or if you're Latina, or if you're divorced and Latina woman, you don't belong behind the pulpit. I mean, it's just all over the place. But concentrating on, our beautiful homeless sisters and brothers, or marginalized or vulnerable, why can't people see their beauty and their value and just give them a chance? You can't judge someone by its cover, and we do it all the time. We have prejudices and biases, and I mean, in my faith tradition as a Christian pastor, Jesus called on 2 commandments: love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And, in the judgment to the nations, I mean, did you feed me when I was hungry? Did you give me something to drink? Did you dress me when I was naked? Did you come to visit me when I was in prison? But across all faith traditions, really, it's that human kindness and love, and it's lacking in the church across every denomination, from individuals or even whole congregations sometimes. So no wonder why our folks who come to places like Open Cathedral say, gosh, I hadn't been in a church in 15 years because I didn't, they would look at me, they would look down at me, or ask me what I was doing there. I'm here to worship. I mean, what are you doing at church? We have folks that walk off the street during service, not during COVID, but, and they come and they get food and they get coffee and they're all welcome. But, churches don't do that. I mean, a lot of churches don't. And I think we really need, I don't feel it's out of meanness, or I feel it's out of fear and out of ignorance sometimes, and fear that, oh my gosh, am I going to catch something? Am I going to get bed bugs? Am I, or will this person steal my purse? Or, it's all this. So a lot of it is not out of having a hardened heart, I believe, in our churches. I believe it's like everything else. We need to open our hearts for sure. And also just look at the person as a person. When you walk down the street, I mean, that's a great exercise, like we do at Night Ministry. I mean, we don't invite ourselves in people's lives, but when people are walking down the street, don't turn your eyes away pretending you don't see someone. It's the opposite. Just look at them and say hi, and don't be afraid if they ask you for $1. Say, I'm sorry, I don't have, it's not about the money as much as when you acknowledge the human being and you say, I see you, you value to me. The same in the church. If someone walks in, or invite people in that are, not from your congregation, we need to learn But we need to have just open heart. We really need to practice open heart. Open Heart Inc. Megan, I know that's the name of your, but anyway, thank you.
That's a good segue, Megan. Have you noticed ways that is bias in congregations?
Yes, I have. I noticed it when I was homeless the first time. There were several churches in the area that wouldn't let me in because I didn't dress accordingly. And, I mean, they look at me today and they see what they see. But I mean, there are times that, I looked a wreck. And I I remember one time I was at church and my shoes broke. And I didn't have the money for a pair of shoes. And oh my goodness, I mean, one person got really upset and ended up upsetting the pastor that was preaching. And, like I said, there's so many times when I was homeless that they'd look down and they'd say, well, that old lady there, that's what happens when you're a nobody and you're on drugs or alcohol or anything. And they don't even know me. I started Open Heart while I was homeless because I was mad. I was mad because I couldn't volunteer places to help. And nobody would, I said, well, you know what? My late husband and I had a nonprofit and I could do it again, and went down to security or to the federal building, to the IRS, and within about an hour and a half had my 501c3. And, like I said, I started it with just sandwiches, making the sandwiches. If I had leftover food that I had gotten, I'd take it and I'd feed people. And my board of directors, I lost 3 of my board members in a car accident, and they really made me look good. But we had built up a program that we were servicing about 1,500 homeless people a day. And I really enjoyed that. And like I said, when they passed and when the accident happened and I hired somebody new, I was so wanting to build this position that I didn't pay attention. And I went back east to put 2 shelters together and come back, and I was evicted. I was $72,000 in debt, and I didn't have anything left. And, like I said, I made decisions to do what I had to do to make things happen, but not for nothing. The biggest thing that I learned from all this is that, I was glad I named Open Heart, because you've got to have a heart that's open. If you cannot open your heart and look at these people, these homeless people, their brothers, their sisters, their fathers, their mothers, aunts, uncles, these are people that have families. They're human beings. They have feelings. And, most of them, yeah, some will ask you for $1. Some will ask you for a cigarette. Some might even ask you for food. But what they most want is somebody to say, hey, you mean something. You are a human being, and I care about you. And it's really funny because when I do my outreach and I go and people go, oh, hi. We don't get anybody to talk to us. The only time they come by is they take pictures of us on their cell phone and put it on 311, and then DPW comes and takes everything we own. And I know that feeling because I lost everything I owned. I mean, more as I care to count. But the church on Mother's Day, I go home and there's a white picture. Everything I own, Open Heart stuff, a computer, everything is in the back of this truck. And I just, no, wait a minute. No, it ain't going down like that. I'm getting it back. And I climbed up on the back of the truck to pull it out. And they said, no, don't you dare, lady, because we're going to take you to jail. And they seriously meant it. But the homeless people that were around me said, no, Megan, it's not worth it. You can get new. And luckily, for the grace of God, I went back to the church almost in tears and said, I just lost everything I own. And within 20 minutes, I had clothes. I had, something to make covering, and I like I said, I belong to a very wonderful church, But there's churches out there that aren't so wonderful. And, they're all different denominations. I mean, there's some that if you are not wearing good clothes, they won't let you in the door. Um, you know, I've gone to them to talk for open heart since I've been housed. And I go to talk to them, and they go, lady, you need to go somewhere. But you invited me to talk to you about my nonprofit. And they go, you can't have a nonprofit. You don't look like that. And I'm like, you know what? Open Heart doesn't need to deal with you. And I'd walk away. I mean, I know that, but so many times I've had people treat me like their sisters to it. I mean, if you can't love them, if you can't acknowledge them as human beings, don't harass them. But that's what that's what our community has done. We have started a vigilante because we have this, take a video of these people that are just living in a tent, and we'll send DPW out. Come on. Why not go out and say, hi, would you like a cup of coffee, or would you like a bottle of water? Instead of judging them and thinking they're not worth anything. And like I said, I get to preaching, and I don't have a problem with fighting City Hall in a minute, because I think we ought to do more.
Well, thank you. And just know you're surrounded by 3 pastors where preaching is what we get paid to do. So maybe not so bad today. Valerie, do you have thoughts you want to add?
I understand the impulse to get your preach on. And I have my own issues reining that in sometimes. So again, everything they said, I mean, to me, it's the kind of the quintessential thing is this question I get from people, and I'm well-meaning, how do we handle homeless folks who come in? It's not, almost never, how do we welcome homeless folks who come in, or how do we welcome people with mental health issues, or how do we welcome somebody who's having a hard time with their addictions? It's always, how do we handle? And I think even when it comes from a well-meaning place, just the fact that congregations and communities of faith are looking at their response through that lens of how do we control, like how do we make everybody sit still and be quiet, rather than how do we make a space where it's okay if you have to pace and talk to yourself, or go out and have a cigarette and come back, or how do we make room for the way that people need to be in the world is not the question. The question is, how do we make people conform to how we do things? And I get that balance, because for all the people who like to sit still and be quiet, maybe it feels kind of uncomfortable to have somebody pacing in the back talking to themselves and maybe getting a little louder and a little louder. That can feel uncomfortable and maybe interfere with how they are connecting with God at that moment. So, there is this balance of everyone's needs, but I think if there could just be this shift of how do we welcome that person who maybe really can't sit still and be quiet for an hour, and doesn't know all the cues of when do you stand, when do you sit, what do you sing when, what's the response to this liturgy. If we could look at it through the lens of welcome and say, like, how do we design our worship to allow for that so that everybody can be comfortable? I think then we would start to see a shift to people actually feeling more welcome, not feeling excluded. And for congregants to have some other response besides, how do we just make this stop? And usually how do we make it stop is like, how do we usher the person out? Unfortunately. And it becomes this cultural thing that Megan was talking about, of like seeing someone struggling, living outside, and the response is, how do I not have to see this? I'm going to call 311 and make it invisible to me, even though it doesn't change. It changes things for the worse for the person whose belongings are being stolen. I think there's a real opportunity for communities of faith. If we can change the question we ask ourselves, then maybe that can kind of change the questions the culture asks itself, and then maybe we start to respond to this crisis in a way that's a lot more helpful than how we're doing right now.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that I've been thinking about is that for this town hall, I have purposefully stacked the deck a little bit with people whose answer about how to welcome homeless people in churches: do everything. Do everything to care for them, because we all are in many ways incarnation theologians. We believe those texts in Matthew 25 that says when a homeless person shows up, Jesus is there. So our answer is what we're good at, what we're comfortable with. We've worked for over a decade, I think, all of us, caring for homeless people. We have a lot of experience with mental health issues, a lot of experience with extreme addiction, and a lot of experience having boundaries that are the same every time. And so that's one of the things we haven't maybe named. I've also preached in congregations where it's gone terrible. On Christmas Day once, I was preaching at a fancy congregation, and a person who was having a mental health issue that particular day was eating a whole chicken in the back pew with their hands, so that it felt a little aggressive to eat a whole chicken in the back pew. And then at one point when I went up to preach, you had to climb upstairs and then there was a spotlight on you. It was that kind of church. So I went up, I appeared outside of the door, and the individual had come up the aisle like to give a sermon. And I have, in my faith, I've always believed that if it's our job to listen for prophets, that if the mental health community has decided that everyone who hears the voice of God has a mental health issue, that there should be some faithful people, not all faithful people, because it's not everybody's ability to do it, who listen to people who hear the voice of God to see what in fact God might have to say, right? And so it's just a listening activity. And so I was really curious, like, what was this person going to say? Right? They had come to the front during the time of the sermon, and I felt very comfortable that whatever they said, I could still do a sermon after that, right? But it was not comfortable for an usher who came behind them and tapped them on the shoulder. Now, all the people who work with the homeless on this call are going to go, like, don't touch them, because one of the most difficult things you can do is touch someone when they're having an issue. You don't know if they have experienced domestic violence. You don't know if they have been in prison. You don't know if touch is pain for them. And it just can scare people for a stranger to touch them. And so an usher touched them on the shoulder, basically, I think, to try to tell them that the sermon was happening and they were not the one doing the sermon. And the homeless person turned and punched them in the face right before the Christmas Day sermon, everybody. And I had thought that I could preach after anything, but when they asked him to leave and he went to the bathroom down the stairs on the way out, it took the Christmas message off a little off track. I'm telling you this story because I think there are costs to caring for the homeless, right? There's a higher cleaning bill. There is different ways you have to readjust. You have to learn about chronic addiction and chronic mental health issues. It's not every congregation's cup of tea. But I have seen success stories, right? At Old First Presbyterian, I can name names now because I'm telling good stories, right? So at Old First Presbyterian, where I had my office for 12 years, they wanted to figure out that balance of how people could worship with them, because they felt uncomfortable with some smells and some sounds and some body movements, and they weren't sure who they should trust because it's San Francisco and things happen. And so they paid me to sit in the pews with the people, which was fantastic because it's the people that are fun to sit with in church. And part of it was just teaching them church culture, not for the purpose of silencing who they are, but just because it made all the other worshipers feel better that I was nearby. And sometimes the person did want to know which book is the thing in, and they wanted to sing the hymn. And so it was like having a special usher, right? So congregations having special ushers can be a success story, or a special person who knows about the homeless, or a social worker, or someone who can sit with someone and maybe has a really good instinct for when something is truly an emergency and when it's just a new noise that we can all adjust to and it'll be okay. The other example that I want to give of a congregation who did really wonderful things is of a Lutheran congregation in Kailua Kona, Hawaii, right? Because we never lift up our island brothers and sisters in our examples. I got a grant to do a vision project to get machines to help people get free eyeglasses, but I had to teach it to another city. And I had been doing homeless ministry long enough that I knew if I picked Hawaii, that it would be a very smart way to work too much. And so we went to Kailua Kona. I went there once a year for, I think, 3 years. And we did what is a program they have in San Francisco, Project Homeless Connect. So I would go and we'd bring the eyeglasses machine. And this congregation in Kailua Kona would organize breakfast, lunch, and supper for as many people as would show up. They got people who did diabetes testing. They got the local rehab spaces who could provide care. They got the people who had halfway houses where people could move indoors that day if they wanted to. They got people to do fancy haircuts for the homeless with like a hose on the beach while they looked at the ocean, right? They did massages for people. My mom and my grandma even came to do foot lotion one year to care for people. And it was this, imagine the aloha spirit while caring for the homeless. It's everything that you could imagine about how beautiful that could be, right? You have paradise in the background, but for the homeless who are there in Hawaii to get healthcare, you sometimes have to fly to a different island. And so healthcare is even less accessible on the islands than it is in places where you have to make it a lot of blocks. And so having all of that in one space with a bunch of aunties who just utterly care for you and feed you way too much food. And they had free toys for all the kids that would come. And we would end up caring for over 700 homeless people in one day, getting them all free eyeglasses, all because this congregation just like loved them more than they could possibly like try to love people. And so that would be one of my examples of things that have gone well. Pastor Monique, have you seen some things in congregations that have gone well? Things that maybe people could try to do in other places. They can be examples that don't work in the coronavirus if you just want to like have examples that work. Whatever you'd like to lift up.
Gosh, that sounds really, that's a dream if we could all do that, or a little bit, even on a small scale. Oh, I'm thinking, Megan, I just, well, like in this Coastside Church, the story I mentioned about our brother, they're the first, I would venture to say he was the first homeless brother. The congregation, aside from this few who told him not to come back, I mean, they really opened their homes. One of them offered a barn for him to live at. The other one, he was one of the ministers, gave him a job. And so the community did come together. Of course, this is on the coast side, so you don't see a lot of folks. But and then at the end, our brother died away from California. So after months, we were able to transport his body back to the town and had a beautiful burial. I mean, I know this is not what you're asking, but I'm just talking about a congregation coming together, having the experience of opening their doors, and the doors mainly of their hearts, and welcoming someone other than themselves, different. But really, I think it's just, I really haven't had other experiences except from my own. Just we're all called to be this walking and living gospel, right? And so I think it begins with the pastor, I feel, and you're gonna have folks like we've talked about who aren't going to be welcoming, or they're going to put this wall up a little bit. But I really feel if if each of the pastors and the ushers have this welcoming heart, or we can slowly take small steps, small baby steps in how to welcome someone. Like Valerie said, it's not about how to deal with them, but we talk about how do we deal with these people. It's how do we welcome. So I really haven't had experiences like the ones that you mentioned, but I would just start with oneself. And I don't know. I'm really at a loss here. Maybe Valerie has.
It's okay, because
more
it
answers.
says a lot, right? It says a lot if you haven't seen it, right?
Yeah.
Valerie, did you want to add something?
Yeah, for inside congregations, not so much. I've seen one congregation down on the peninsula where I used to attend regularly, and there were a couple of folks who had some fairly severe mental health issues, and they were housed in a group home, and they started coming to church, and they would sit in the back. Like it was awful. Like right from the start, like they knew their place, right? Like you could tell they'd been down this road before. And I always sit in the back because I like to welcome new people and meet all the new people, and that's where you get to meet the new people. So I ended up sitting with these folks, and one woman who I ended up being friends with, she would wear headphones and have music playing all the time because it helped drown out her voices, and she really wanted to drown out the voices so she could focus on the surface. And it wasn't loud, but you could hear it, and she was just so aware, of just even this, just everybody, like, and I could see that, but like by the third week, do you still have to be turning around? Like at what point can you just go, oh, that's what that person does? At what point can we just say, that's how that person is, and okay. And we love them as they are. And so I think we do that very well at Open Cathedral. I think, I wish I had like a really good COVID success story for us for Open Cathedral. We've been doing our Bible study online via Zoom, but that's not accessible to most of our folks. We tried it as a conference call to make it more accessible. It really didn't work. So we went to Zoom, but most of our folks, that's not an accessible technology. And so it's just, for the church that really tries to make itself accessible to everybody, that we are so inaccessible right now. It just breaks my heart. But before COVID, to have a church where, like, if you need to sit down and shoot up by the altar, okay. If you need to walk in and out and smoke and talk to your friend in the back, okay. It's like we didn't allow people to make threats to each other, and we didn't allow any violence. But if outside of that, really, it's everybody was welcome in almost every behavior, as long as it didn't involve hurting somebody or threatening somebody. And to give people voice. I mean, our prayers of the people would often turn into a series of like mini sermons. And it was so beautiful that people were like getting their voice. Or one of our brothers that was, really started to sing in public at our worship because he felt able and welcome to do that. And like started getting gigs around town, like really, I've always been, even when I used to do Christian ed, and I was always big of like, not just on Children's Sunday, like we need to have kids reading scripture, we need to have kids, getting their voice. I organized my children's sermons so that every kid talked every Sunday, it's always been my thing. And Open Cathedral was really a place for that. And even we have one brother who's basically libertarian, and I'm so far left, I'm like treading water by the Farallons. And so I would preach my sermon, and he would get up and kind of like preach a counter sermon during the prayers for the people, and I would be like, amen, right? Because that's my job, is to sit there and say amen, and like I totally welcome your viewpoint, even though it's really different than mine. And I think, so I would say, Open Cathedral is a wildly successful version of opening people. Walk in, walk out, do what you need to do, have your coffee, smoke your bong, whatever. As long as you're not hurting anybody, we really welcome you there. And I realize that, not all of that is feasible for an inside church, but for a church to really intentionally think about what's okay. And, you mentioned boundaries. So like, what's okay, what's not okay. And then we can stick to that. It's okay if you need to talk at a certain volume. It's okay if you need to pace as long as you do it in the back. And maybe we're okay with you pacing up and down the aisle, but just to decide wherever that line is, and train our ushers, like, don't approach somebody from behind and touch them. It's like you say, for us, we're like, don't do that. So to just intentionally think about those boundaries before you're faced with it in worship.
Well, then, and I'd also say, and then apply them fairly to everyone.
Right, exactly.
So if the wealthiest person in your congregation paces down the thing, like, they should get the same treatment, right? And so that's where it becomes difficult, I think, is there's a lot of people who have unusual behaviors during church. Maybe only the pastor sees them, but sometimes if we're only policing unusual behaviors from people who have a certain economic level, then we've seen people protesting in the streets when they think policing is unfair, right? And so we have to kind of figure out how we're going to be greeters rather than usherers. I don't know if that's the change that needs to be made.
I like the nuance.
I think there is something in what you said about there being some spaces where anything goes, which makes it also possible to refer people, right? Your congregation doesn't have to be an anything goes congregation. You can be a congregation where everyone has to wear white bow ties if you want. Just know how to refer people, like, because not every congregation is going to have the fanciest organ, right? There's different kinds of choirs, in the same ways that we could feel comfortable letting people know what congregation cares a lot about harpsichords. We could let congregations know which places are going to be the most welcoming and supportive, not as a way to get out of our Matthew 25 responsibility, but just to know that we might have more heart opening to do so that we don't damage people. And one of the things I wanted to name is that part of the reason, well, in my doctorate of ministry thesis, one of the things that I studied was whether or not being served in church spaces was healing for people with church trauma, and particularly if people needed to talk about faith with people in order to help them heal their church trauma. And what I found is that the simple act of being fed or having a program at a church space healed people of the ways that they had been told that God couldn't love them, right? It's healing for churchy people to care for the homeless. But 98% of the people I surveyed wished the churches where they were eating would invite them to Bible study, or wished that those congregations would talk about God with them. Because sometimes us being so left that we're almost at the Farallons means that we give people freedom of choice, and we're not necessarily proselytizing in the same way. Sometimes that's the requirement of funding that a lot of our ministries get. And so one thing I wanted to name is that most of the faithful people who are caring for the homeless are from a Baptist tradition or from a fundamentalist tradition where they're caring for the homeless because there is a point system in their theology that they get points for saving souls. And so you shouldn't be surprised if the homeless people that you're talking to about God speak back to you in an evangelical way, because most of their conversations with people about God come from that theological perspective. That doesn't mean they don't want to be Lutherans or they wouldn't love to be a Franciscan, like wherever you are on the spectrum. It's just that that's the only language of faith many homeless people have ever had conversations in. And so I just wanted to lift that up, that part of our having a difficult time having some of these conversations comes because we are freed by Christ to not need them. but that means that we have to then choose them and figure out how we're going to participate in those conversations. Megan Sue, have you experienced places that are doing things well in communities of faith?
Well, yes, because 2 years ago, I went to Beaumont, Texas, and to Lake Charles, Louisiana. And what it was, there was two brothers. One belonged to the church in Lake Charles, the other to the church in Beaumont. And they had heard about the shelter system that I had designed with compassion, dignity. And so they contacted me and asked me if I would like to come help them set up two shelters. And I said, yes, I would. Well, I was there for 8 months. And, one thing they told me before we went to the first church service is we do things just a little different here at our churches. And I'm like, okay, I'm ready. What do you do? They said, well, everybody's welcome. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. And so we're in Beaumont, Texas, and I'm sitting in the middle of the church, and this gentleman walks in, and not clean, and he starts kind of dancing in the aisle. And then all of a sudden, one of the members from the church jumped up and started dancing with him. And these two are dancing in the aisle as the priest, and the pastor did a real good job because he didn't stop. He kept preaching. But I mean, and it was really, it was really warm to see, somebody just basically had enough compassion that said, hey, let's make him feel comfortable. And there was so many times in that 8 months that I went to church in both churches that crazy things happened, and the members would actually join in. And it was like, now that's something that would make somebody feel welcome. And I was asking one day, one of the people in Lake Charles, I said, why do they do that? And the deacon that I was talking to said, reason we do this is, number one, you don't know who they are. God comes into your, sends people into your congregation, into your midst, and you are to listen to them. And, who are we to say what they're going to do? And, it was really funny because the lady at Beaumont, she was in charge of coffee hour. Now, our church thinks I get crazy about, our coffee hour. This woman put out a full spread banquet. And, if somebody would walk in, the first thing she's doing is grabbing a plate, putting food on it, grabbing a utensil, and running to the person and handing them this plate. And I was like, wow, that's like really cool. And so seeing the 8 months, seeing these two churches and the way they operated was really like, it really warmed my heart. And it was no surprise to me, because of the way these churches act, when Beaumont got their shelter opened, the state of Texas went in and looked at the shelter system and made the shelter in Beaumont a model shelter for the state of Texas. And I mean, they really deserved that title because they really worked at it. They took what I designed and they fine-tuned it. And it really made me feel good. I mean, the original people that were involved in Open Heart, we had a picture that used to be on our Facebook. They hung that picture. God, I don't know why. Probably get rid of anything because it was a bad picture. But the two girls that were with me, wonderful girls, and they have that right over the front desk. And they said, this is the lady that put this together. This is why we do what we do. And I said, really, you guys are the ones that took the ball and ran with it. You guys are the ones that have gotten 100% graduation in your programs. You're the one that's making these people back to members of society. And I was so happy that when I left, that I was actually a part of these two congregations, because like I said, any given Sunday, you didn't know what was going to happen, but every time it was the same thing. They felt welcome. They knew they could come there. And, the congregation is just going to get as crazy as they did, I guess. I don't know.
Thank you. One of the questions that we've been asked by those who are watching is how you can show person who is homeless that you care. And we spoke a lot about opening your heart, but I guess the question would be like, what does that look like? And I'll start us off. I'll give you a couple of tips that are ways that I show homeless people that I care. It's called Ministry of Presence, and it's about knowing what my body is doing. So I assume most homeless people do not have the correct prescription glasses that they need. And so they might or might not be able to see my facial features. So in a normal pastoral situation, just a smile might be enough for someone to know that I'm listening to them and that I care about them. I assume homeless people likely don't have glasses and might not be able to see that I'm even smiling. So what I do is I smile at them in a much bigger way. And you'll notice I even do it in this Zoom call. And Pastor Valerie's doing it right now. We do big head nods that we care about you. I might do things like if someone swears and apologizes because they think you shouldn't swear in front of a pastor, I'll do a very big, I don't care, I love you, right? So it's about, we'll sometimes do bigger hand gestures. If you notice that the person is sad, or you know they have an experience of domestic violence, they might not appreciate big hand gestures because they might have fear about someone being large around them. But other than that, you kind of have to do some big gestures. You're fixing your face. So even if you're thinking, I don't know if this person is talking about something that's real or not, you don't change your face. And the way that I listen, which is to listen for a very, 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 very long time, I assume that their reality is their reality. And it doesn't have to be my reality, but my conversation with them exists within their reality. And I might recommend to them safer ideas, but I'm going to do it as a question. Like, I wonder if caffeine would help you go to sleep, right? So I might offer suggestions that are more legal or that are more long-term health good. But if they're not really interested in that, I'll probably just only offer something safer 1 or 2 times. Because my goal is for someone to know that I love them exactly as they are, which is, I think, Lutheran theology. And so to be able to proclaim that someone is beloved just as they are, sometimes that means like, I just love their family the way it is, that I love their tent is a house. I love whatever I love. And sometimes this means that if you know someone has a problem that you can solve, like one of the questions was like, how do you be kind to people knowing the differential, right? You might be able to help with a blanket, but what they really, really, really need is housing. And if you can't help with that, what does that mean? But one of the things that I've appreciated, another example of a congregation that's done a wonderful thing is St. Paul's. St. Paul's had a loving long-term relationship with a homeless person who kind of came in and out of their lives. They taught him to read. They taught him to read at almost age 50 and let him read the Bible lessons during the time he was not good at reading. And they would read it along with him in the way that a parent reads with like a 5-year-old, helping them get through the book that they're trying to learn how to read. And I'm telling you, it's still the most sacred church thing I've ever witnessed. So if there are places where someone has a barrier to their health or a barrier to what's a part of their life, and you can help them with it, and that's your call, like, help them with it, right? It might feel like teaching someone to read is too hard, but by golly, if one congregation can do it, your congregation can do it, right? They just made that their Bible study time, like helping someone read the Bible. What's a more amazing legacy than that? The other practical thing that I would add in terms of how to care for someone who's homeless is breathe through your mouth, not through your nose. Because if you are someone who is sensitive to smells or isn't used to being around different kinds of smells, if you breathe through your mouth rather than your nose, it just means you'll smell less of smells. and it can help you transition a little bit. After you've done it for a really long time, you might stop noticing. I stopped noticing. But for beginners, breathe through your mouth, not through your nose. Megan Sue, do you got any ideas of tangible things people can do to demonstrate their care?
Well, and one of the things that I've been, that I use is because, like I said, I was taught as a little girl growing up that, a way to a person's heart is through their stomach. And like I said, taking somebody that comes in, first of all, homeless people 9 times out of 10 are hungry. So you can take them something to eat and, like a piece of cake. We always had like goodies and sweets at our church. And, you give them like a donut and a cup of coffee. And that, just that little thing made them feel comfortable. And like I said, once again, this thing in Beaumont with this lady running there and with this plate of food for them, it was like, I think she basically could have told them to do anything and they would have done it for her because, she was showing her love and her through a way that she knew how. Just like me, I know how to show you love with cooking, by cooking for you or feeding you. And some other things like our case management program. But like I said, basically feeding somebody, once you do that, you've got them won. I mean, every time I go out, they say, when are you bringing food, Megan? When are you bringing food? And it's like, they tend to be more receptive. And so, like I said, just a snack, you don't have to give them a full 5-course meal, but maybe a piece of cake or a donut or something like that.
That works for house people too.
Oh, anybody.
That's right. Monique, got any ideas?
Yes. You talked about ministry of presence, and I feel that's probably the most important for me. From my years with night ministry and at our open cathedrals or wherever, it's that ministry of presence, but it means a lot. I remember at the beginning of night ministry when I first started, it was within the first month and a half. I literally just went to my van one night and I'd had it. I thought there were a couple really heavy duty, very sad people I had met that night. A lady who was elderly with cancer and unhoused. So I went to my van. I just sat there and I just broke down in tears. And I was talking to God and I was just saying, I think I heard the call wrong. Maybe I don't belong here. There's nothing I'm doing. I'm not making a difference. I'm walking around. Maybe if I have a blanket, I'll give it. A pair of socks. If someone's out for a good time, they'll say hi to me or, why are you wearing a collar? I used to get this when I was walking out at night, what Halloween party I was going to. So that would break barriers, right? Because they weren't used to seeing a woman with a collar, etc. But that night, I just sat and sobbed. And in my spirit, in the quietness of this, after I calmed down, feeling helpless, I'm not doing good, I'm not doing anything, and I'm not making a difference. I'm a single mother. I can't afford to put anybody in a hotel. I can't afford even, and I was thinking all of this, how incompetent I felt. And in my spirit, I heard, you are not here to save anyone. You're only here to love them. And that just made it, that just made it for me. It was like, it gave me the green light and the permission to just be there. In my own brokenness at times, in my own poverty of financial poverty as a single mom, trying to make ends meet myself. But with my heart, I was there and I was present every night, just sitting, listening. If they want prayer, they got prayer. If I did have a few dollars and someone was hungry, sure. But it was that genuineness of love, of let me just sit here with you and care for you whichever way. And you're right about touching. I learned that in a very hard way because I'm a very huggable person, and coming from I'm from Mexico City, so we hug and we kiss and we talk with our hands, and so I learned a hard lesson, not to touch at first, but I feel that's the first step. Is like I said earlier in our talk, in our conversation, our time together, is just acknowledgement, first of all. I mean, that's caring, and then, yes, there are needs. There are physical needs, and there's emotional needs, and there are mental needs, and there are spiritual needs. Spiritual needs really is huge for people too, but I think it just begins first with just sitting, acknowledging, seeing, and and it begins with, again, just opening yourself to being able to peel off those layers of bias and whatever you've heard and whatever you think. Peel it all off. It's just like come before someone basically emptied from this biases and things that you've heard of people say about are unhoused or are marginalized, or anyone for that matter. If we can try to work on that and just approach the person with childlike eyes and heart, that innocence, that wonderment of I want to get to know this person. That, to me, that's how I begin to care for someone. Whether I have $1 million to build a shelter or whether I have $1 to do nothing with. It begins with that, with the love and presence, and that's how I begin to care. Yeah.
How about you, Pastor Valerie? Pastor Valerie, by the way, for those who don't know her, clearly, I think, was chosen to be this current night minister out on the street, because Valerie, I think, could befriend a woodpecker in a desert where there are no trees. Like, Valerie could sit and have conversation with just the person you would put on a desert island, because they were not capable of having healthy conversations. Pastor Valerie would be that person's best friend. And so what are some of the tips that you would share with people who are interested in trying to show people that they care for them?
Thank you. Well, all the good wisdom that you all have already shared, especially Megan, what you were saying about being with people in their own reality. I think that is why I can sit with people of okay, well, maybe the aliens will not see us as well if we go stand by the wall instead of in the middle of the street here. You can just work from where people are. You can be with them in their reality. So that's important. I think, and just relaxing. People can tell when you're on your guard against them. If you are striding down the street, if you're making yourself big, if you're looking like the tough guy, people feel like maybe that's the safer way to walk. Oh, so not the safer way to walk. Amble, liquid spine, relax. People can tell when you are relaxed in their presence. And if someone's volume is going up, if their emotions are getting big, just as you mentioned, some of our unhoused siblings, that can be really intimidating for them. I know for some of us, that can be really intimidating, especially if you don't know somebody, and the smell, and, folks can start to worry for their safety. I would, relax, just relax, can do so much. And it means so much to people. It was just, maybe a month or two ago, I was over in the Mission on Julian, where everybody camps outside St. Boniface there. And I know a lot of people in that alley. because I walk down there all the time. And I was sitting, talking, sitting on the ground like this, just chatting, as you would with any group of friends, and somebody commented, you're so relaxed with us. And I said, and it just came out. It wasn't a calculated remark. And I said, well, I trust you. And I do trust them. And it's and I'm somebody who's actually kind of really guarded and slow to trust by nature. But what I found is if I can just kind of give this gift of trust up front, it really comes flowing back. And it's, I won't, if a situation seems different, dangerous to me, I'll book it. I'll get out of there. But to treat people with trust, to treat people like they're safe to be around, because our folks that we pastor to at night ministry spend their whole day with people afraid of them, with people not willing to look at them. I hear I might as well be a wall. I may as well not even be here. It just, not even in your congregation, but if you're walking down the street, and I think somebody said this already, and somebody asks for money and you can't give it, you could say, I'm sorry, I don't have any, but I hope you have a good day. That, because we're hardwired. I mean, we're tribal by our evolution. And if your tribe doesn't love you, you're alone on the savannah, and that's dangerous. Like the tigers are going to come get you. And so it hits at this really deep level when people treat you like part of this furniture or the architecture. So just to say hello, just to smile. And the same thing when somebody comes into your congregation. Not to be this voyeuristic, oh, we're going to look, but oh, hi, welcome, have a seat, just to be seen, and in a way that's welcoming and not voyeuristic. You mentioned how we approach things theologically. Like, you can take liberal concepts and wrap them up in Pentecostal language. I had this long run for like a year and a half. I have a Buddhist side of my practice, and like all my sermons were Buddhism wrapped up in Christian language, and all my talks in Sangha were somehow Christian wrapped up in Buddhist language. It's like, so, you just take the concept and wrap it in that language. And it's, no matter somebody's faith background, if you say something like, do you know that God loves every single part of you? You just, that's going to land for anybody. It's true. It's absolutely true. And people, especially folks living outside, tend to have a lot of shame about parts of their lives, partially because they're treated like they should have shame. And to hear, there's this one guy in the Tenderloin. It sounds strange to phrase it this way. My favorite drug dealer in the Tenderloin, who I talk to all the time. Then I think it was either the night I met him or the second night I met him. He's a pretty hardened guy. He's pretty tough. And I said that to him, and he started crying, like at Turk and Hyde, and tears coming down, because like nobody was saying that to him. But do you know, like every single part of you, like even those parts you don't want to even look at, is beloved by God. So you can take your theology, and your, I don't mean this as pejoratively as it sounds, your nice white liberal theology. You can take that and wrap it in the language of the person you're speaking to. And it takes a little bit of practice, but it's not really all that hard. And I have a sibling who's left the Southern Baptist because they were too liberal for her. So I have that language in my ear, and that kind of helped me when I started at night ministry, because she's that way. But it doesn't take a whole lot of adjustment, and you can take your good theology, your sound theology of a loving, accepting God, and just wrap it up in their words.
Yeah.
Can I say one thing? And I also forgot, when we're talking about being welcoming and etc. A lot of times that you mentioned it, Reverend Megan, about and Valerie too, I think, your street retreats, the street retreats that you have gone to. So I feel that for our churches or congregations, or maybe in whichever area you live, folks could perhaps, like, we have people coming to night ministry to walk out with us from all, from all around the country. Youth groups come, so from early on they come out. or groups from university students to walk out to see this. The Faithful Fools with their street retreats, their whole week street retreats. I mean, there's a lot of stuff where that people can get involved with if they're if they're afraid. It's understandable, but to be able to get closer and to see a different side along with a group and not just themselves.
Well, and also to see the role model of the night minister who is out walking with them and how they're approaching people can be
Right.
a wonderful thing too. Yeah.
In our open cathedrals, exactly. Yeah.
We're approaching the end of our time. We have one last question that I think I can get us to answer by simply raising our hand rather than answering questions, because I think I know you guys pretty well. All right, so the question is about funding. How many of you have had a moment where you have been underpaid while working with the homeless? How many of you have been so underpaid while working with the homeless you weren't certain if you could afford your own groceries at any point in your life? Right. How many of you wish large organizations would fund your ministry? Right. How many of you have been told large organizations should fund your ministry? And how many of you are connected to large organizations that could fund your ministry? Exactly. All right. Well, Megan Sue's going okay. But for the rest of us, know that traditionally this is a position where people are underpaid and live on the borders of marginally housedness ourselves. And that funding comes and goes. There are times when we are blessed and get lots of grant income and lots of stewardship from individuals, or sometimes when people leave bequests, and sometimes when you get to do ministry projects in Hawaii. But each of those times have equal and opposite downturns. Times where all the staff you hired a few years ago can't be maintained this time. And so it is a bit of a roller coaster. Fundraising is one of the things that is the hardest for me, because I know every minute I spend fundraising is a minute I'm not listening to the people that I want to serve. And so if you are connected with organizations, the question actually was, don't you think we could connect with organizations? And the answer is yes, we could do that. But we need folk to connect, right? We need folk to connect for us and to connect with us to share some of the work that's happening and to get resources into the right places. I am incredibly grateful that the three of you made time for this conversation. We definitely could talk about this for years and years and years, and there's so much more to talk about, but I hope that it gave some food for thought for those who are in congregations to think about ways that they can care. One of the things that I heard said is that some congregations are not good at ministry to the homeless inside their buildings, which lends a possibility that maybe they're better at it outside their buildings. And so there are some places that are looking for parking lot programs, places where people living in cars could stay. And so your congregation could consider that. But mostly I just want to thank everyone for opening their heart enough to start having this conversation. Next week, we will be having conversations with people who have gone through the team program in seminary and who are doing ministry out in the world, and I hope you'll join us for that. But until then, take care, stay as safe as is in your control, and know that you are beloved by God, every part of you. Right, Valerie?
Every part.
Every part. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bless y'all.
God bless y'all.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Bye.